Really humbling on behalf of the Los Angeles City Fire Department to have this award for all the hardworking men and women. Needless to say, it has been a very, very difficult year for us. We did everything we could to the best of our ability. It's been also traumatic, and so much of wildfires are environmentally wind driven, and so it's so important to have people come together and celebrate the storytellers and to have discussions about the environment, about the increase of wildfires in severity and duration and frequency that we're seeing. And so we're really honored to be a small role of all first responders and to accept this award.
We'll do it live. Okay.
No. We'll do it live!
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live! And things suck!
That is how hard I pronounce the F in fuck the new LAFD fire chief. It just keeps getting worse and worse. That little video of PIO Eric Scott, it's emblematic of what is wrong with the Los Angeles Fire Department, but it's only gotten worse. We have a new chief, and he just did a news hit with ABC. You have to see it to believe it. Now, there's some other fire news, but I mean, this is really the only reason we're on tonight. I have to cover this, otherwise I'm not going to be able to get to sleep. It pissed me off so much. But we have new news with FedFire. Brian Fennessy, who's the Orange County Fire Authority chief, who's outstanding. I've been saying the whole time that the two best candidates to lead FedFire would be Chief Bobby Garcia, that was my number one pick, and Chief Brian Fennessy. Brian was a hotshot, and he is an outstanding leader. He's very innovative. He's done a lot in bringing new technology and aviation into local fire departments in Southern California. So he is absolutely an excellent pick to lead FedFire, but he's got his work cut out for him. Now, as you may or may not know, as they're standing up this new agency, I call it FedFire. The feds inexplicably are calling it the U.S. Wildland Fire Service. So USWFS. You already have the fish and wildlife service. So you have the USFWS, and now you have the USWFS. And the USFWS does have firefighters. Why do they keep picking these stupid acronyms? Just call it FedFire. So the first thing that Brian Fennessy needs to do is rename the agency to FedFire. Okay, it's really that simple. But beyond that, for some reason, in the Fed's wisdom, even though I think it's a great idea to be consolidating everything and standing up this new agency, the U.S. Forest Service is not included. They're not included. And I do not understand this. So it's just DOI, Department of the Interior. The majority of wildland firefighters are in the U.S. Forest Service. They do the most work, especially in the most active region, which is Region 5. Why are they not included? I don't know. They're saying that they're going to integrate them in 2027, but that leaves an entire fire season where you have this separation. And what's happening right now in the Forest Service, because it's so disjointed, because there's no clear vision of where they're headed, they have been losing all of their studs in leadership positions to the point where every significant leadership position in Region 5 in particular is completely vacant. So we're talking about major issues when it comes to doing prescribed fire and doing all this off-season work. There's nobody at the helm. To make it worse, the U.S. Forest Service just appointed a botanist in charge of he's the deputy chief of fire and aviation. I was told that there were no viable candidates other than this botanist, which is an absolute fucking joke. It's either a joke or it's a lie. But right now what's happening is a continuation of the main problem with the U.S. Forest Service. You have ologists in control of what's essentially a firefighting agency. And these ologists are in between the fire chiefs and the firefighters. This is a huge problem. And them appointing a botanist to be the deputy chief of fire and aviation, they're saying, oh, this is just the acting. This is the acting deputy chief. Okay, how long till we get a real one and someone with actual fire experience? To lie to us and pretend like, oh, there were no other viable candidates. Give me a fucking break. There were about 60 applicants to get the job that ultimately Brian Fennessy got, who are superlatively capable of doing that work, who did not get the job with FedFire, and they would probably be open to taking this job. Why they weren't asked? Well, it's because you have the plant people in charge of this agency, and they do not know what they're doing as it pertains to wildfire. Or they just want to keep the wildfire workforce hamstrung, so that way they can leech off the fire suppression budget and do all their stupid team plant projects, whatever the hell that is. So Chief Fennessy, he's going to have his hands full. I mean, the main issue is there's going to have to be a huge culture shift with the DOI. The DOI does not do firefighting the same way that the U.S. Forest Service does. Okay, this may seem like wonky stuff, but in terms of staffing, in terms of they don't even have like SCBAs in their engines. Okay, so the firefighters in the DOI, as it currently stands, they're not going to be prepared to address a fire like the Eaton fire, right? Where you have Angeles National Forest resources going into the urban interface and fighting structure fires. So all that said, if anyone can get that agency up to speed, it is going to be Chief Fennessy. So this is a great job. This is very encouraging. You've got two huge moves by the president. First, in standing up this new FedFire service, but then also putting Chief Fennessy in charge. It's an absolutely excellent choice, but the U.S. Forest Service is limping along. My concern is that because the Forest Service is being ignored and Team Plant is basically running the show, there's going to be a lot of prescribed fire projects that don't get done over the off season. And we're going to get another Grizzly Flats. Something bad is going to happen. And this could be a nightmare scenario. So these vacancies need to be addressed immediately, because right now is when we start doing all the project work. So anyway, let's just get to this chief interview. Okay, so you've got a new chief for the Los Angeles Fire Department. That's Chief Jaime Moore. We're just going to go into the video and I'm going to respond to it. It's about 10 minutes long. I sped it up a little bit just so we can get through it, but man, it's a doozy.
Let's get to what everybody's talking about, what everybody's concerned about, and the questions that are being raised are about the department's response by your predecessor at the helm to the Palisades fire and the way it was prepared for, and perhaps whether the fire department had any shares in any of the blame or the reasoning for why this fire, the Palisades fire, happened. Of course, the Lockman fire a week before, allegedly set by an arsonist who's now in custody, but that some text messages, as reported by LA Times and others, among firefighters, purporting to say that they were ordered to leave by the battalion chief without a complete mop-up of the fire. In other words, they were saying there was still smoke smoldering, that there were rocks and tree stumps and the like still hot to the touch, and that one of them, in fact, said that it was a bad idea to leave. What do you make of those text messages? Have you any response to that?
Well, certain news outlets have reported that these text messages were exchanged, and I've yet to see those text messages. I've asked the news outlet to provide me with those text messages. They have not provided them to me. And understand the reason why I want to see those text messages is because twofold.
Okay, yeah, the LA Times isn't going to give you the fucking text messages. Journalists, they protect their sources. Those text messages came from whistleblowers within your department. Now, this dude allegedly went to 69s to the station as he was being considered to be the new fire chief, and immediately after he was appointed, and went to intimidate these guys and tell them to keep their mouths shut. Allegedly. That said, him pretending like he doesn't understand what's going on here it's already, we're off to a really bad start. So of course the LA Times, they're not going to give up their sources. You've already threatened these guys. Why are they going to give up their source to you?
One, it shows a deep concern over the decisions that were made, if that indeed really did happen.
It did happen.
Again, I've never seen those text messages. And
Do you believe them?
Well, I have to believe that there may have been some concern. And when I said the second reason why I was so concerned about it, it's because if an individual is going to the news outlets with that information, that means they care. That means they truly care about our organization. But yet, if they care so much, I'd ask them to come talk to me about it so that I could address it. I could follow up with it and find out the facts that led to the decision making that may have caused them to leave. In speaking to the incident commander from the fire, they never ever received any type of text message.
Okay. I don't know if he's stupid or if he's pretending to not understand. The text messages that Spencer Pratt broke this story about 2 weeks before the LA Times followed up and stole the scoop. These text messages were from Los Angeles Fire Department firefighters, not overhead, but the actual pipe hitters, texting each other saying, yeah, that was really bad. We shouldn't have left. Okay. They did not send any texts to the battalion chief. They did not send any texts to this guy because they were talking shit about overhead behind their backs. Okay. So no wonder they don't want to give this stuff up. Okay. But some of them spoke to Spencer. Some of them spoke to some people at the LA Times. This is why the battalion chief did not receive these texts. Someone did speak up in person on site at the Lockman fire and said, we probably shouldn't be leaving this. Like, hey man, there's still some hot coals up here. Shouldn't we mop this up? And he was told to leave. Now we're never gonna have that except through depositions, which are coming up, 12 LAFD guys. But that wasn't in a text message. Him pretending like, well, I haven't seen the text messages. What does that matter? Address the substance of what they're talking about. He's totally ignoring that, and that's for a reason.
And this is an active investigation with the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, where they've subpoenaed the text messages that were exchanged by anybody that was at the Lockman fire.
When did they subpoena those text messages?
And to my knowledge, no information has been provided.
No text. They haven't gotten any text messages.
As far as I've been told, the investigators have not been provided with any text messages or any information saying that there were text messages exchanged. And I can tell you, the incident commander has already turned over his cell phone to be able to provide the information to show if those text messages were ever there. Now,
again, these text messages weren't sent to the IC. They were sent from the lower level guys to each other, the guys who were on the incident. They did not send it to their overhead. I don't know if he's pretending to not understand this or if he's just dumb.
Understand the ATF is doing an extensive investigation, not just into the Palisades fire, but what led to the Lockman fire because it was a holdover fire. So they looked into that and they're looking into those text messages. They're looking at repeater sites. They're looking at text messages and everything any activity that may have been done with cell phones as part of their investigation. So you couldn't get a more thorough investigation than what they've come up with. Yeah. They've determined the cause of that fire being the individual who's in custody for the Lockman fire, and that they believe that it was a holdover fire from the Lockman fire that led to the Palisades fire.
I'm wondering if this is an issue of just semantics or if there's a real difference or a reason, because I haven't been able to figure it out. A holdover fire versus a rekindle. What's the difference?
So the difference between a holdover fire and a rekindle is a holdover fire usually happens in some sort of chaparral, and it's a deep, deep-seated fire that burns down into the root system. Now understand the chaparral along the coastline of Los Angeles and Southern California has two different types of root systems, one that's very shallow and another one that's very, very deep. In the case of this holdover fire that happened in the chaparral at the Lockman fire, it was a very deep seated, and it was undetectable. It was an undetectable holdover fire where the embers were down deep into the soil.
I'll just remind everybody that I posted video, I broke this story, showing that the fire was still smoldering at the surface when these guys left, okay? So it may have continued underground, but I actually don't buy that. I do not buy that. What I think was actually happening was you had an ash pit from a stump that was still consuming. And it wasn't showing smoke. So after that initial first 2 days where it was visibly smoldering, then it was just smoldering underneath. And then the winds kicked up the ash that was on top, insulating that burning stump. And then that's when it started flaring out and kicking up embers. This idea that winds made their way down 20 feet underground to rekindle something, and then what? Then what? Where did it burn its way up to? Right? If it's burning down from the base at the surface level and it's burning down in the root system and it's 25 feet underground, where did it go? If that were to flare up again because somehow winds made it through some little fissures and cracks in the soil, even though this fire rekindled on the lee side of the ridge, so it was not getting hit with those kinds of winds. But let's just assume that's true. Where does that then go? Where does it go? Back up where it's already consumed? I don't think that's what happened.
So it would take oxygen to be able to cause that to flare up. In this case, it was undetectable. We did not have any reports of fires until 6 days later when the actual Palisades fire.
Notice what he's saying there. They did have reports of smokes. They had people calling in smokes several times over the course of that week saying, hey man, I'm smelling smoke. I'm seeing some smoke wisps coming from the Lockman fire. And his firefighters responded to those. They did not go out. They just investigated from the street and reported it UTL, unable to locate. Now, one thing that can happen with burn scars is that you get some winds kicking up ash, and that, really fine white powder can sort of look like a wisp of smoke. So it's relatively common that civilians will call in a false smoke, and it'll be UTL once firefighters get there. So it wouldn't be that crazy to think that they just presumed it was a false smoke because it was just ash wisping up. And they decided not to hike up the hill to go and investigate. Well, that proved to be really deadly. But again, he's saying there were no reports of fire. Yes, there were. There were multiple. And his agency responded to those. They might have called them UTL, but there were reports, including for several hours prior to the fire on January 7th. People were smelling smoke at 7, 8, 9 in the morning. They were smelling smoke. They weren't seeing ash. They were smelling smoke. Daniel Firecopter says they could have checked for heat at least within the burn scar out of caution, especially for a small fire. Precisely.
Erupted. That being said, it was 100-mile-an-hour winds. It was those intense gusts of.
All right. I'm done. Anyone who says this 100-mile-per-hour wind bullshit, you can just write off immediately. Fucking fire this guy. This guy is, all right, now we know he's not dumb. He's fucking lying. He's continuing with this bullshit excuse. First off, there were never 100-mile-per-hour winds in the Palisades. There were never 70-mile-per-hour winds in the Palisades. There weren't 50-mile-per-hour winds in the Palisades. And especially not early in the morning. The biggest winds of the day hit overnight, where you had a period of about 1 hour to 2 hours, where you had a few 42-mile-per-hour gusts in the Palisades. Up until that point, you didn't see anything over 38 miles per hour. So when he tells you they had 100-mile-per-hour winds hitting the Lockman scar, that never happened. This is a fucking lie. I am so sick of all these government officials constantly using this excuse. Gavin is always doing it. He's always saying 100-mile-per-hour winds attached to a fire. Never fucking happened. They continue to lie. This is so insulting. What are they doing? We all know what happened. We all know this stuff. They can't just keep lying, or they can, I guess. But now we're seeing, it's very clear, this is why Karen Bass hired this guy, because he is going to toe the party line.
Wind that blew over that terrain that caused that holdover fire to come up. So when we have a rekindle, we confine the fire to a small area. We dig it all out. We put foam on it. We wet it all down. And that's usually in structure fires. We always try to make sure that we're never going back to that rekindle. When we deal with wildland fires, you'll realize that we call it containment. We contain the fire, and we do a scratch line all the way around the perimeter of the fire. And that scratch line is intended that if there is any hot spots or any embers inside that are burning in there, they're not going to jump out and get into the other chaparral or the brush, because the containment line is wide enough. In this case, we believe, the incident commander believed that fire was out and directed individuals to pick up the hose. Mm-hmm. That wind was strong enough to where it blew up the holdover fire to where the ember cast came up. There was still some materials that could burn there, and with that wind, cascaded it well past that containment line.
First off, their containment line was about that wide. It's the smallest scratch line that I think I've ever seen. They did not have a containment line. They did not have a legitimate containment line because, of course, the Topanga State Park plant people did not allow them to cut anything. They weren't able to get to bare mineral soil around any of that dense vegetation where you would need a bigger containment line. Now with grass, yeah, you can get away with a tiny scrape, but that, 7, 8, 10, 12 foot tall manzanita that was out there, dude, you need a dozer line to ensure that that's not going to flare up. And even with that, with good winds and ember can spot over that, all the more reason why you need to have thorough mop up. They didn't do any of the legit dry mopping that has to accompany spraying things down with foam. That's not enough. You have to uproot this stuff to make sure that it doesn't burn down into the root system and become a holdover. So the fact that Topanga State Park would not allow them to uproot any of that vegetation, that's the reason why this happened. Now, the thing is, this dude has a perfect out. He can take, hey man, the state parks wouldn't let us uproot anything. If we had been able to uproot some of that burning material, we could have stopped it from burning down underground. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he makes up this fucking lie that there were 100-mile-per-hour winds. I think Gavin Newsom called him. I think he got the call from Gavin. And this dude is a company man. So he's not doing anything to throw shade on the state park. He doesn't even mention where it started. Doesn't even mention it. Daniel Firecopter says, every time I search Palisades fire winds, it keeps showing 80 to 100 mile per hour winds. That's where they're getting their bullshit from. And that's the thing. Like, we know it's not true. We know it's not true. It's so crazy.
Some 20 to 25 feet below the surface. Is that the belief that winds at the surface of the ground could cause oxygen or air to penetrate 20 to 25 feet down into the root system of a plant?
When you're blowing that much wind at that velocity for the duration of time that our Santa Ana winds were blowing at that time on January 7th, absolutely.
Again, in the LAFD's, his agency's own after action report, they said that at the onset of the fire, even though the winds got really bad later in the day, during the initial attack, the winds actually weren't that bad. They were like 20 miles an hour, gusts. Okay, so that wasn't even sustained 20 mile per hour. It was just 20 mile per hour gusts. And they said they had ample opportunities to deploy aircraft in the early hours of the fire. So this dude doesn't even know what his own agency that he's responsible for is saying about this. And he's trying to pretend that, like, oh, we had some unprecedented winds. Even if the winds got to hurricane level later in the day, and they certainly got worse as the day progressed and fell into night, at the outset of this fire, they did not have crazy winds that would cause this super dramatic rekindle. Them trying to pretend that this thing was burning 25 feet underground and then hurricane force winds just made it do the impossible. They are trying to get out of this responsibility. That's all that they're doing. So it's hurricane force winds. It was 25 feet on the ground. Ignore the video that I posted showing that it was smoldering at the surface. Just ignore that. We had unprecedented conditions. Do you now see, do you have those goggles on to now recognize how they always do this? They always use the unprecedented conditions that we had no control over as their get out of jail free card every time.
It would be enough for that to be able to bring up, cause some fire, and then cascade those ember casts well past. And we had reports that ember casts were flying 3 miles downwind. So as firefighters were responding to the initial fire, there was fires that were burning behind them.
That's not true. This fire did not spot 3 miles ahead of itself on the initial attack. It did not, right? When it was first burning, you had, I think it was like 20 acres was the initial size up. It was not spotting yet. God, this guy just continues to lie. And the thing is, nobody who's watching ABC 7 has read the after action report, nor have they been, watching my live streams or reading the lawsuit. So they're just, they see a fire chief and he's wearing his badge. They just trust him.
Because of the ember casts that were going over them because of those Santa Ana winds.
One of the criticisms or questions that was raised was about the pre-deployment of resources before the Palisades fire ignited, when you had the red flag warnings and all of that. Reports that no units were placed in Pacific Palisades before that happened. Can you talk about that?
Well, what I can tell you is this: is we use a pre-deployment model based on the weather and what the predictions will be. That decision-making matrix is gone over by our Deputy Department Commander and the various geographic bureaus and the specialized resources. Mm-hmm. And from that, we use a matrix, a decision-making matrix. A lot of it depends on the wind, the anticipated winds, the temperatures, most importantly, the relative humidity, and how likely the fuels are to catch fire. And so the decision was made to deploy resources, and we deployed the number of resources we would have for that time. The criticism comes in the fact that we did not staff all of our additional pumps, and that we didn't recall our members and holdover members that were going off duty. Now, I can tell you this: had we held over all of those resources and all those members and deployed them, it would never have prevented what happened at the Palisades. Unless I had resources sitting at the Palisades when that fire erupted, there was no chance of getting in front of it.
This is exactly the fucking point. Unless we had people positioned right below the recent burn scar where we've had multiple reports of smokes over the last week, and we know that rekindles are a thing. Yeah, unless we had people positioned there. Dude, that is the criticism. He's trying to misdirect. He's saying, the criticism is we didn't recall all of our staff. Like, no. The criticism is you didn't have anyone babysitting the most recent fire in your district. I understand that, like, it's tough to pick where you decide to pre-deploy resources, right? You have to guess because there are too many areas that can catch fire and you don't have enough engines to cover them all. So I get it. You have to use your best guess. Wouldn't you think that the number one criteria in your decision matrix for where to place resources would be, are there any recent burn scars? Let's babysit those first. The Palisades, especially up in the highlands, should have been the first place that they pre-deployed resources. And here you're saying, well, you know, there's nothing we could do unless we had resources in the Palisades. Dude, this is what people are fucking criticizing you for. Why didn't you pre-deploy to the area that had a fresh burn scar?
Because it was such a fast-moving fire. The fire was, when the initial resources arrived on scene, it was already a large, fast-moving fire that was already into the structures, and it was headed towards the ocean. Our resources deployed, and one of the things that challenged them is we had already pre-deployed resources, and they were coming from a previous fire that had already been burning in Hollywood. So we had some resources that were dedicated in Hollywood, they came over, and then we had the resources that were already in the Palisades.
That part is true. That the Sunset Fire, I think ignited like around 9:30 in the morning. That was a problem. That definitely delayed some of the resources from getting there because you had resources that were committed, and then even the resources that were set free, they had to come across the district, and it took them time to respond. So that is legitimate.
So all those resources started making their way up there to get to the heel of that fire to be able to put that fire out. But the ember casts, as I mentioned earlier, were so strong. You had 3-mile-an-hour ember casts, and what was happening is these homes in the Palisades are large homes, and the ember casts were getting up into the vents, and they were getting up into the attics. And so as you had firefighters going to try to put the fire out, there were structures burning behind them. So then they had to start going back and evacuating, because life was number one, evacuating the areas, and then fighting the fires.
Firefighters don't evacuate. That's what PD and Sheriff's Department do. Like, I know they'll use this excuse like, oh, we're on life safety missions. They're not. It's very rare that they're like pulling people out of buildings. Like, your life safety mission is to try to stop the fire front and stop structures from going up. They're not evacuating people.
And as they evacuated, we had, if you remember, we had vehicles that were going down Palisades Drive and were affecting the resources that were coming up. So in hindsight, we should have had resources there. But then again, how do you pick where in the city of Los Angeles you want to pre-deploy resources?
Any area that has a fresh burn scar, any area that could potentially rekindle. That's the most obvious place to pre-deploy.
Do you put them in the Palisades, or do you put them in Bel Air? Do you put them in Hollywood Hills? Do you put them in other areas where we have wildland, Franklin Canyon, Laurel Canyon? All of those areas are vulnerable areas that have a potential for fire.
You can't put resources, you can't put fire trucks in every canyon neighborhood in
we
LA.
just can't. We just can't. And if you remember, even with all the resources we brought in from allied agencies, we weren't able to put those fires out until the winds stopped. It was the winds that were propagating that fire and continuing the fire to move down to the neighborhoods that it did. It was driven by the winds, and the homes that were burning were the ones that were susceptible to fire.
There are some 42 recommendations contained in the after-action report. A tall order. Well, some of them sound very costly, some of them difficult, all of them necessary in the view of the people who wrote it. How far is the department along in addressing those recommendations?
So as of this morning, we're 74% complete in, as of this morning, we're 74% complete in addressing those 42 items. We still have a number that, again, is going to be very costly. We're now entering the budget process with the City of Los Angeles to be able to address some of the budgetary concerns. A large number of the items that are in my budget that we've submitted have to do directly with the Palisades fire, and we've identified those. But some of those have already been completely finished. We just talked about the deployment matrix and how we just made the decision making. One of the things it requested, or it recommended, was that we change our deployment matrix to take into consideration these particularly dangerous situations, like what happened on the day of on January 7th, day of the Palisades fire.
Bro, how about if you had a recent burn scar? How is he not, like, I'm a moron, and I know that, like, okay, you guys didn't think about it before. I don't know why you didn't think about it, but yeah, number one on your decision matrix should be, if you had any fires within the last 10 days, that's the first place you would pre-deploy. You'd at least have a patrol up there to monitor. And the thing is, you know, God bless this guy, the interviewer. He doesn't know any of this stuff. He's not prepared to ask any real significant questions. He has no clue. He has no clue.
Already started to implement new policies and procedures with mop-up, so we can avoid any type of holdover fire in the future.
So they didn't do anything wrong, but they're going to change how they do mop-up. Nice little do-si-do.
We've increased the level of training for our members. the requirements is to post.
In the after action report, it said that there were many chief officers who had zero wildfire experience, zero, and they were completely incapable of running an incident of that magnitude in the wildland urban interface.
Fire, what we're doing. But the other thing is to take this as an opportunity to create a wildland division. And that's something I'm exploring, and that's something that the mayor has been supportive of. Obviously, it's going to be costly, and it's something that we're trying to look at what we already have and trying to.
I was going to say, how are they going to afford a wildland division? They can't even staff their brush clearance unit. There's one guy in the entire brush clearance unit. Karen Bass keeps siphoning money out of their budget and giving it to homeless drug addicts. And now they're going to get a whole bunch of like Charlie rigs up there. They're going to train up some hand crews. They're going to have like IHCs now in the Los Angeles Fire Department. Get real, dude.
Take what we already have and turn it into a wildland division that would be able to address a similar type of fire. We know that these fires are going to continue to happen. We never want to see a fire of this magnitude.
Let me ask you, if I may, do you support, should every home that was lost be rebuilt? This is an area, and I'm not just there, but I mean, you're talking the urban wildland interface, right, where homes are interspersed.
This is actually a good question. It's a tough question, and it's a question that none of the residents of the Palisades are ever going to want to fucking entertain or hear. But it is a good question. The density of the homes is absolutely a problem. In the same way, the density of the fuels in the Topanga State Park is a problem, right? Homes are fuels too. They're a lot less receptive to fire than brush is, right? So it's way more important that you get rid of that brush around the interface. But, having a fuel break, it probably should apply to the homes as well, because there's no denying the fact that because the homes were so tightly packed in the alphabet streets that they stood way less a chance of stopping those dominoes from falling, because there were no real gaps. That's definitely an issue. So I don't know, man. That's a tough question, because like I said, nobody in Palisades is going to want to hear that fucking question.
Their homes are interspersed and they're in canyons and they're surrounded by trees and brush. Should every home that was lost be rebuilt, or should there be exceptions?
Well, I can't speak to every home because I've not been there to see every single home that was lost. However, there are steps that we can take to address the homes that were lost, and that's called home hardening. And that's something we need to take advantage of now in the areas that haven't had the fires. I recently was in Laurel Canyon and met with homeowners there to discuss steps that they can take to prevent what happened in the Palisades in their homes. Wildland preparedness is something everybody can do, and there's areas throughout the city of Los Angeles where people need to be more resilient, and they need to take those steps necessary to have a more resilient, hardened home by choosing materials that they use, the windows that they use, by taking simple steps, by removing certain brush that's susceptible to burning.
Again, they want you to remove your brush, but they won't remove theirs. It's rules for thee, not for
their
me.
homes, adding screens to their vents, all of those things which would stop embers from getting into their homes are actions that they can take to prevent these type of fires from ever happening again. Now, as we look at,
these are all good things, okay? No notes.
The Palisades, there are areas that we do have some concerns. For instance, hydrants, and we're trying to work with the homeowners and the DWP to address their need. But there were areas that were very far from hydrants, and so we need to make sure that everything goes to code.
What? Dude, the issue in the Palisades wasn't that the hydrants were far away. It's that they were empty. They were dry. That was the issue.
And as they rebuild, we want to make sure that we encourage them to rebuild homes that are resilient to fire.
Speaking of rebuilding, your department, one of the most understaffed big city fire departments in the country. You've got equipment that's aging. There were 40 trucks that were sitting on the day that the Palisades fire broke out that needed repair. How can that be addressed in a way that can make the city safer?
So the mayor has supported us and the city council supported us in our last budget. We have 10 fire engines that are coming from our last budget, 4 trucks. We have already received from a previous request 3 of 6 fire engines. So 3 new Pierce fire engines already arrived in our fleet. We're getting 3 more from that. So in this next budget request, we have 10 fire engines, 4 trucks, and a helicopter, a water dropping helicopter. But we also have brush patrols that are coming. So those brush patrols will help us get in those maneuverable areas that we need to be able to get into those tight spaces up into the Hollywood Hills, up into the Palisades, and they'll be able to they allow us to be able to get a firefighting resource to those areas much quicker. So those things will help us. In regards to the apparatus, we have 17 positions that we're trying to fill for mechanics. Unfortunately, there's a huge demand for mechanics. We had 7 positions that were open for heavy equipment mechanics. We only had 3 people apply. And that's partly because they're specialized mechanics that deal with diesel engines. And so the demand is so great throughout the industry that we only had 3 individuals apply. So we're trying to be progressive and get those mechanics back onto the fire department so we can get those apparatus back out on the street.
All right. You have a big job ahead of you. 3 weeks in, we will check back with you periodically to see how the progress is going and see how that effort is bearing fruit. Chief Moore, thank you very much for joining us. Eyewitness Newsmakers will be right back.
Okay, so at the end there, he talked about getting brush rigs, Type 3 engines. They're a little bit smaller, they're a little more maneuverable, so they have less water carrying capacity, but higher pressure. So those are good for running progressive hose lays uphill. This is what the U.S. Forest Service has. And yeah, they are more maneuverable than Type 1s. They can get places the Type 1s can't get, but that wouldn't have made a single difference on the Palisades fire. Okay, the issue wasn't that they needed to get up there into the hills. They needed to just be on these streets where there was nobody around. And none of the houses are on fire yet, but all their ornamental vegetation is starting to go. And if you just had one Type 1 bumping and rolling, they could have saved this neighborhood from burning down. Look at all these tiny little spot fires that, since they're left completely unattended, end up becoming a big thing, right? Dude, you just needed people here. You needed people here. Like, where were you going to go with those brush rigs? There's nowhere to drive onto Topanga State Park. There's little footpaths. So what were you going to do? And you guys you didn't even secure the heel of the fire. So like, what is this LARPing? Like, we're gonna suddenly have a wildland division when the real problem is we couldn't even navigate these streets. So like, guys, they keep ignoring the plain reality that I don't care what you have, Type 3, Type 1. I don't care what the heck you had. You just didn't have anybody here. And you didn't need a Type 3 to get up this street. So all of this stuff it's just fluffy nonsense. And he didn't address the real issues. And the fact that he's insulting our intelligence by going with the 100-mile-per-hour wind lie, it just shows, okay, there's never going to be any candor coming from this department. Ever. They're just going to lie to cover their asses. It's so fucking pathetic. But honestly, this is what you expect from a chief. Remember that fire chiefs are not to be trusted. They are politicians. When you get to that level, you are a politician. There are very few exceptions. And I would say Chief Muncie down in San Bernardino, Chief Fennessy, I think is really great. And Chief Bobby Garcia on the Anderson National Forest. He has probably the most integrity out of any chief that I've ever seen, like beyond reproach. But generally speaking, fire chiefs are politicians. And everything that they say is just like what a politician will say. Anything and everything that they say has to satisfy 2 needs. Cover your ass and get your money. Cover your ass and get your money. Those are the 2 needs that must be met for every statement that they make. So they're never going to say anything that threatens their liability or their budget. So they're going to demand more money, and they're not going to take accountability for doing anything wrong. This is precisely what he did with that entire interview. Covered his ass, he got his money, protected his money. And that's all that you can expect from a fire chief. This is insulting. This interview, I knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep if I didn't do this live, because the thing is, like, we all know what happened, and they're still insulting our intelligence by acting like we don't know what happened. Like, we don't know that it was still smoldering when they left. They're telling you, no, it was just totally undetectable and it was already burning 25 feet underground. It was a lie. Oh, it's 100-mile-per-hour winds. It's a lie. Even if the winds got intense later that night on the fire, they weren't that intense the morning that it rekindled. So it wasn't some extraordinary circumstance that led to the rekindle. They just did a really sloppy job. And the thing is, like, we know that the employees at Topanga State Park told them that they couldn't touch certain plants. They couldn't use, again, it's in the state park policy manual and in their firefighting agreement that they have with the LAFD. that they are to do reduced mop-up, limited, minimized mop-up. So they're not supposed to uproot anything. And this is how you end up getting a holdover fire in the root system. So he could have easily just said, hey, look, my guys were trying to do the right thing, but Topanga State Park has this agreement with us. It's in writing that we're not to use spades, and we got to do the least amount of, the minimal impact suppression tactics. And that limits how we can do it. And this is the risk when you don't do thorough mop-up. But it's what the state park wants. They wanted to let it burn, so that's what we had to do. It's our agreement. He could have said that. And we know that that's the case. Like, we've been talking about that forever. He could have said that, but he didn't. I think he got the call. He's a good little boy, and that's why he got picked. You think Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom are going to allow anybody in there who's going to tell the truth and have any kind of dignity, candor, or integrity? Of course not. They're only going to pick a good little boy who's going to follow orders and make sure that nobody gets blamed, right? So if clearly LAFD didn't do anything wrong, according to him, they didn't do anything wrong. Nothing went wrong. He's never even seen the text messages. That never happened. So just in complete denial of doing anything wrong. And the state had nothing to do with it. Gavin Newsom, I remember early on, was saying it started in federal lands. So nobody did anything wrong. Nobody has any hand in this. I don't know why I keep expecting somebody to have some integrity and speak up. Even the firefighters don't have any fucking integrity. It's taking subpoenas to get them to finally speak when they've been too cowardly to do so. And that's going to change in the next week, where they're all going to get deposed, 12 of those guys. And we'll see if they're honest in their depositions. They might still lie. But fortunately, we have really good attorneys leading these depositions, so they'll be able to catch any lies that might come out. But ultimately, I'm just so sick of all these people, especially in overhead, just dodging accountability. And it's so insulting. And what's even worse is this motherfucker showed up to the Christmas tree lighting ceremony in the Palisades today or yesterday or whatever. Dude, I keep saying it. The LAFD needs to address this stuff. They can't keep pretending like the public doesn't already know about all this stuff. They can't just say, oh, I've never seen the text messages, and then just disregard that LA Times story and Spencer's reporting. They can't keep doing that, because I'm telling you, I talked to a lot of people in the Palisades. They are this close to fucking booing these guys out of Starbucks or worse. Like, they're going to get fucking beer bottles thrown at their heads. The LAFD guys. I'm telling you, that's coming. They need to address the elephant in the room. And this continued bullshit with Eric Scott, their pathetic PIO, and this good little boy, this company man, Jaime, it's insulting, man. Anyway, good luck, guys. There's not going to be any positive change in LA, clearly. As long as this is how they're going to operate, Karen Bass is just going to put in a dude who's going to cover her ass. Good luck. Good luck. If you live in Bel Air, if you live in Brentwood, I hope you have good insurance. All right, guys. Remember, in this dystopian world of AI and lying motherfucking fire chiefs, the only way to prove that you're human is to do it live. Have a good night.